Good evening and welcome again to another program of Globespan 24x7. It's a very, very hot day here in New York. I'm sure it's a blistering day in Guyana. And I'm sure in Florida, where my friend Salim is, it's also blistering hot. Today we are discussing or continue to discuss events that unfold in our country. We are no more knowledgeable. We are not more knowledgeable now than we were prior to these filings. To help us along, as we said earlier, Guyana is setting the blaze. We are the forerunner of many things, except I guess we're in the wrong direction. Today, the appeal courts ruled, and we are nowhere the wiser to know exactly what transpired today. To help us along this path, we have two prominent attorneys in Guyana. Mr. Datadin will join us shortly, but with us right now, we have Mr. Timothy Jonas. And to help me along this evening is no stranger to us, Mr. Salim Nausrudeen. Gentlemen, welcome to the program tonight.
How are you, Charles? Good night, Tim.
Okay. Tim, our viewers have no clue what transpired today. I have watched social media on the coalition side, and they're celebrating, saying that this is a victory for the coalition. I'm seeing information coming out of the opposition saying it's a victory for them. So both sides can have victory. We hope Guyana will have the victory at the end. Tell us, Tim, in clear layman's term, what transpired today at the Court of Appeal?
Clear layman's terms. That's hard to do, Charles. I'll do the best I can. Ms. David is a APNU supporter, and much like Yulita Moore from a few months ago, she has been recruited to file this application to the Court of Appeal on behalf of APNU. Now, we knew what was going on. The recount has demonstrated Mr. Mingo's false numbers. The recount has demonstrated a win for PPP by about 6,000 votes over the combined opposition. And therefore, when the commission instructed Lowenfield to prepare the report under Section 96, based on the recount numbers, only one result inevitably will follow: a declaration for a PPP victory based on the recount numbers, and swearing in of Irfan Ali as president. Now, of course, that's an unacceptable position for nearly half of the country and for the incumbent. So, Ms. David applied to the Court of Appeal by a special procedure which exists under Article 177. And to tell you the truth, before it was done, I didn't even know about this 177 procedure. I had to go and check it out when I saw. So obviously, their lawyers have been doing a lot of homework in anticipation of this. But 177 is a procedure which allows you to go by way of application directly to the Court of Appeal. Now, that in itself is unusual, and that confused a lot of people. Because usually, when you go into court, you go to the High Court, and when you lose, you appeal to the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal is an appellate court. But this particular application is a special procedure that you go straight to the Court of Appeal, not as an appellate court, but first time. First jump, you go to the Court of Appeal to ask them to make a ruling. And the Court of Appeal is empowered under Article 177 to where a question arises as to the validity of the elections for the purpose of qualification of a president, or for any other issue dealing with the construction of the Constitution. So it is directed at qualifications of president, and in that context, interpretation of the Constitution. So we know a president got to be Guyanese. So if you got somebody from Finland or Norway coming to be president, you can go to court and say, this man is from Finland or Norway, please for construction, say he can't be president. You go straight to the Court of Appeal to do that. And what Ms. David did through her lawyers, Sanjeev, good to see you, Well, Miss
Hey,
David,
Timothy. Good evening.
through her
Hi,
lawyer,
good evening.
Miss David asked the court to find on an interpretation of the Constitution, specifically Article 177(2), which says that where you got two presidential candidates competing, the one that gets the most votes wins. And Ms. David asked the court for a whole set of things. She asked the court, based on the history, to declare that Lowenfield is obligated to consider all the objections in the observation reports that were done. She asked the court for injunctions. She asked the court for other relief, but she also asked the court, in terms of this section, this Article 172, that the person with the most votes is the winner, to declare that most votes means most valid votes. Well, that speaks for itself, because if the vote isn't valid, if it doesn't have a stamp on it, or if it's got two X's so you don't know who the person voted for, or if the person who cast that vote was not a citizen of Guyana but was living in Russia, it's not a valid vote. So of course when they say most votes, the person who won the most votes, they mean the most valid votes. So that was also almost a non-issue. The Court of Appeal has dismissed all of the prayers for injunctions, declarations as to what Lowenfield must do and what they're obligated to do. But that particular prayer, the Court of Appeal has ordered that in terms of Article 175(2)(b), the most votes means most valid votes. And that is what the brouhaha is about. That is what the noise and the uproar is about. Sorry, Charles, I'm not hearing you. I think you're muted.
I think you're muted.
Thank you, Tim. Sanjay, welcome to the program tonight.
Hi, good evening. Good evening to all your
Sanjeev.
viewers. Good evening, Timothy.
We are trying to break down, and Tim was very meticulously, he was trying to tell us what happened in court today. Selena Henry wrote a nice comment. She said, I'm a law student and I'm thinking of changing my career. She don't think this is the right career for her. Sanjeev, by the time this thing is over, I think all Guyanese will have a really great knowledge of our Constitution. The problem is we cannot interpret this Constitution. Even the court seems to have problem helping us to do it. So tell us, as Tim was telling us a minute ago, in your own words, what exactly did the court rule today so we can all understand?
Well, the thing about it is true. All of Guyana will have an appreciation of the Constitution, which is a good thing. It's not always a good thing, the interpretation that the courts and those that should interpret it, how they're going about it, is not always positive. But in essence, what happened was there was an application before the court by Ms. David, and what she was trying to do was have an interpretation of Article 177. Now, we believe, and it without speculating, that was the only thing that the court would have had any ability to respond about. All the other things that were asked, which were injunctions, which were declarations, restraining orders relating to the commissioner, the CEO, all of those things, none of those things could possibly have been granted because they don't involve an interpretation of the Constitution. And they were not, in fact, granted. They were all dismissed. What the court did is the court interpreted what is meant by valid votes and determined that it meant what is meant by most votes, and determined it meant most valid votes. Now, as curious as that sounds, I don't know that that advances anything further in reality, because I would sincerely hope that they were not counting the illegal votes or they were not counting the invalid votes all along and they came up to these numbers. I couldn't imagine that they would have been counting anything other than valid votes. There was a declaration that has already been submitted to Gecom. And in that declaration, what were listed were the valid votes, the true votes of what came out of the recount. What was the issue with that report from the CEO Lowenfield was, in addition to doing that, he volunteered certain information in relation to what he thought of these votes, and he, without any evidence, without any basis for doing so, and without anyone inviting him to do so, he offered opinions about the process. Now, when he did that, the commission made certain orders, and he was given an instruction to present a report in accordance with the recount data. Now, it's strange that so much was made about valid votes in this entire matter. In fact, what their papers filed in the court asked the court to declare was valid and credible votes. And the court did not do that. The court did not go down that road. The court went to a very narrow position of saying valid votes, which pretty much is obvious. And so what has happened now is there's already the report of what the valid votes are. There's already that's with the commission, and the commission should move forward because they have been addressing and moving forward and doing what they're doing based on valid votes. So it might be, in the grand scheme of things, that what they have done is the court has made a ruling. Now, the difficulty is the court could not insert words into the Constitution and ought not to have done that. It then raises the obvious question of who determines whether these votes are valid? It certainly can't be Lowenfield, the CEO, and Gecom has already said, quite rightly, that every issue you have about valid votes, you have to get a judge, and you have to file an election petition, and a judge must do that investigation and come to that determination. So it's no one else that needs to come to that determination. So saying that there's valid votes, I don't know that changes the circumstances in which we are right now.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sanjeev. Salim?
Yeah, in fact, Sugrim, Charles, I was gonna, spend some time on that word valid itself. And I know in this current cycle from no confidence motion to where we are today, we spent a whole lot of months and a whole lot of money behind the word absolute, which was not in the Constitution. Absolute majority, when we were talking about 33 and 32 and 34, which number was higher, which was lower. And CCJ finally said that there's no such word as absolute majority, that majority is majority, and 33 was more than 32. And now we have a new word being plunged into the whole scheme of thing called valid. While valid might be in the Representation of the People's Act, it's not in the Constitution. But again, we are now using the word valid to figure out, whether the election is quote unquote valid or not. So is there sound reasoning by the incumbent government who's putting forward again from absolute, now they've gone to majority to valid? Is there solid reasoning, whether it's legal or political, for us to be debating the word valid?
I think, look, valid votes are what were counted. If you look at all the statements of polls and in the statements of recounts, the tabulated statements of recounts that we spent 34 days doing, if you look at every single one of them, they say the total number of valid votes cast. And that's what they have. And that's what they have apportioned which party has gotten how much of these valid votes. Mm-hmm. So I can't see how, in the face of Gecom coming to these tabulated figures of what are valid votes, that the CEO take it upon himself in the basis of no additional evidence, in the basis of nothing else, to make a determination that effectively changes the determination that Gecom has in existence, which is really for the people in Gecom who were doing the counting. They have come to that conclusion. What basis would he have to change their conclusion? There could be no realistic basis for him to do that. And even if they wanted to say that there was a basis for it, only a judge can do that. The CEO does not have the power to make that determination. And any link that is sought to be made between that being valid votes and the chairman declaring solely on his advice must take into consideration that the only advice that he can give the chairwoman is what is the tabulation of those 10 regions. He can't give her advice on how to train dogs or how to fix a car. That's not what he's there for. He's there for one purpose only. And you have to understand the legislative scheme a little bit. It says that the section has two things. There is a deeming, which says that the person who gets the most votes, the most valid votes, is deemed to be the president. So someone is deemed to be the president. And then there's a declaration that must be made in accordance with that. And that declaration is made by the chairman on the advice of the CEO. And there's a reason for that, because what would you do? Would you have someone run around and say, I have obtained the most votes? Surely it must be a public officer who is responsible for that. So that's the chairwoman, the chairperson, the chairman would then say, well, I'm running the elections and this is the man who got the most votes. But who tells him? Does he walk down the street and ask a taxi driver, what are the number of votes that each person got? No. He asks the chief elections officer, whose responsibility it is to command all the election staff on election day and to count the ballots. So they deliver the message, they eventually deliver it to him. So he's the person responsible with the count. And he informs, as the public officer, he informs the chairman, this is what the count is. Now, he wants to say that basically when this certification was done, and it is now determined that these are the valid votes, that he's taken it upon himself to look at the observation sheets and decide for himself what are valid or what are invalid. He can't go behind that and do that because he has no evidence before him. No one made a complaint to the CEO, There were two places that persons raised objections. They raised it in the counting rooms and the counting stations, and they raised it in correspondence to the chairwoman. Nobody told Lowenfield anything.
Yeah.
So he can't take it upon himself to take what other things are going on and say to people or say to persons that he's making a determination. He cannot. That's exclusively for the court. So I don't know what is advanced by the court today saying that it was valid votes. Mm-hmm. I do know that it is my view, and it is the view of myself and the team of lawyers that represented the PPPC, that the court did not have jurisdiction to hear the matter. And one judge agreed with us and two didn't. But those that agreed with us, that didn't agree with us, came to a conclusion that votes meant valid votes. And I don't know where that takes it further, because the determination of valid votes has to go to the High Court.
So if I can bring Timothy on that same question on valid, I know when the recount was unfolding, the whole idea of the recount was to count qualitative and quantitative. In other words, a ballot came and you looked at it, and if it was according to the Gecom rules and regulations for voters, if it was deemed valid, you count it. If it was deemed not valid because an X was placed at the wrong place, or it had no X, or it wasn't stamped, or it didn't have a seal, then you put that aside, and it was considered an invalid vote. So But when it comes to the current argument, I believe APNU is not even looking at that, because that's already been cleared by Gecom. They're looking at the quote unquote fraud that they have unearthed during that process, as it relates to dying or dead people voting, or people who are not living in Guyana, school children, and those kind of things. So in terms of the who determines if a vote is not valid, and how do you prove that? Because I don't think the exercise today in the court was so much about where the X was and how valid the stamp was and so on. It was more about the many accusation of dead people voting, and the accusation of underage people voting, and all the other accusations. So how does this ruling, and how does this current scenario relate to APNU's position on these thousands of people who would have been ineligible to vote, but they voted?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. You see, Sanjeev is right that this whole question, if you have an order of court that says most votes means most valid votes, you sit back and say, well, what was the point of that? Obviously, most votes means most valid votes. You're not looking for votes, from Iceland. It got to be most, Guyanese came and voted. Obviously, it's most valid votes. And the thrust of the application to the court here, I think, is where I have a problem. You see, no one can argue with a simple order of court that says most votes mean most valid votes. But it is the basis on which the court arrived at that conclusion, the majority, that I have a problem with. And the problem isn't so much the bottom line, that most votes means most valid votes, but it is the fact that, to me, they bent over backward to accommodate what was a ridiculous application. If you come to me to say, does most votes mean most valid votes, and I'm a court, I will say, what stupidness you asking me? Obviously, I don't need to make an order about that. Case dismissed. And yet, these two judges spent a long time justifying why they had jurisdiction and explaining why they felt they had jurisdiction, and going into what a valid vote was and the distinction between the list of candidates and the eligibility of the president, so as to distinguish Article 163 from Article 177. All of that to come to the conclusion that, guess what? Most votes means most valid votes. It borders on the ridiculous, and you have to ask yourself why. And I think that it needs an examination of the word valid. You're quite right. You see, there are a number of screening processes in what is a very comprehensive system of voting, a very comprehensive election process. And if you look at the Representation of the People's Act, there are two stages which are discussed, which are set out, and they're mutually exclusive to each other. The first is what happens on voting day, and that is provided for in Part 8 of the Act. So on that day, on the 2nd of March, Part 8 tells you what you do. You turn up to go and vote, and you have to go to the place where your name is. And the Gecom official who is there ensures your name is there, and you have to produce an ID or its equivalent. And they look at your face and they make sure you're the right person. And then you have to stick your finger in the ink after you voted. That is a screening process to ensure that Charles Sugrim is the person who turns up at the place of poll where he is supposed to vote and votes. That is that screening process. So
is that qualitative? Is that a qualitative part we're talking about?
They are both qualitative. But if that screening process is followed, then according to Gecom's record, the fact that Charles Sugrim's name appears on this list at this place of poll and is crossed off as having voted means that the procedure was followed and he turned up and showed his ID and voted. And if you go and ask Charles and he shows you his finger that's got ink on it, that's part of the screening process. So that Charles has voted qualitatively and his vote counts as one quantitatively. That is provided. That whole system of checks and balances is provided in Part 8 of the Act.
And gentlemen, that is so clear.
Part 9 of the Act deals specifically with after the poll is closed, after the vote is closed, and you're counting. Part 9 of the Act is headed counting of the ballots. And counting of the ballots has a different component of what is quality and what is quantity. Because as you said, when you are counting, sometimes you may see the ballot doesn't have a stamp, so it's rejected. Sometimes the person put the X in two places, so it's rejected. So in that stage, you have a valid vote, a valid ballot, which is where the intention of the voter is clear, in contradistinction to a rejected or a spoiled ballot, where they put the name on it, or they put the X in two places, or it doesn't have the stamp, or something else is wrong.
But,
so
but,
when you
but,
talk
that,
about
but
a valid ballot,
that's obvious, and that can be proven because it's black and white. But how do we get to the next stage and the intent of the case, which is to figure out all these underage people who are supposed to be voting, all these who are not in Guyana, who are not voting, those
you see, you have just gone back to the first screening process that I described in Part 8, which is when Charles Sugrim appears and shows his ID. If you follow that process, according to Gecom's record, Charles Sugrim is there on the list. He's 18 years old or more, and he's Guyanese.
So are you saying in essence that once a ballot is in that box and it's marked correctly and it's counted as a vote, that it's valid?
But Salim, before you answer that question, to both of you as well, in Gecom recount, as Salim was just talking about, they had a basket of issues. And one of the issues was what constitutes a valid vote. The commission decision says vote valid once intent of voter clear. How much more clearer do we need to spell this out? Do we have to go to court to know a valid vote is what even Gecom says in the basket of issues in the recount process?
Well, this takes you back to what Claudette Singh said in her affidavit and in her submissions. You see, and it's what Salim is, I don't think Salim picks up on it by his question. That after the Charles Sugrim appears and shows his ID, that part of the screening process is over. So when the place of poll closes and you have to start counting, that has nothing to do with if a dead person turned up or an overseas person turned up, because that part of the screening process is finished. Charles Sugrim has already turned up and showed his ID. So the ballots that you have in the box, according to Gecom's records, are all ballots represented by voters who properly turned up, put their finger in the ink, and put the X, which is represented on those ballots. So the counting now is something different. You count them and you tabulate. Valid ballots, rejected ballots, spoiled ballots, you add them all up, you put them back in the box, you seal the box. Gecom puts on its seals, APNU agents put on their seals, PPP agents put on their seals. So that when the recount happens now, and it comes back to us and people like me who have to go there for 35 days to sit down and count, we check those seals. The seals are intact. You open the box knowing that the last people who put anything in this box were APNU agents, Gecom officials, PPP agents, all present and saw it done and put their seals. And what is in the box is ballots. We are not able to decide from the documents in the box whether Charles Sugrim was dead or overseas, because that is a different screening process. We are counting, we are exercising a recount, and therefore the only information we can get from the content of the box is if those ballots are rejected because two X's.
Are you saying clearly that valid or that ballot paper in that box is valid? And again, I'm coming back to the intent of this entire rigmarole that's happening in Guyana, that it has nothing to do with those votes in the box. It has something to do with the issue of fraud, and because even if you were to look at all the invalid votes, it might not change the result,
I'm saying that as long as those ballots are in the box, They represent votes by people who turned up and showed their ID and put their X.
You see,
According to Gecom record.
you see, one of the things we have to accept, and it's a little difficult to for some people to even speak about it or to raise it, but this is the reality. At the end of the recount, we all know that of the 460 votes, who got what. We all knew that. On a day by day basis, there were updates being given that everyone knew what was happening. Now, what this application was for was to try to inject an interpretation, presumably to give false hope or a false narrative to the APNU supporters that by somehow, if they say that votes mean valid votes, it gave them some ability or some magical power to change what those votes, what that tabulation process that everyone knows what it was, that this would somehow change it. But it doesn't, because obviously the only things that were counted and tabulated were valid votes already. Now, we all know that what transpired, among other things, was the CEO submitted a report to Gecom, but he took it upon himself to include a number of things, to make a number of assumptions for which he had no evidence, and there were no facts and evidence for him to come to the conclusions he did. So I believe the correct assessment was Gecom told them, well, this is what you submit to us. But he did submit what were the valid votes and what were the numbers. But he then came up with a very arbitrary way by which he was removing votes, because he was saying there were objections about this, and he had some exponential figure that if you made an objection about one ballot in one box, it meant all of the votes in that box were to be discounted. That's not possible. You can't disenfranchise people and remove their votes because one was it, and your argument is well, one apple spoils the thing. It's not a farm. It's people's right to a vote. I don't understand how these really, I mean, forgive my language, it's utterly stupid, asinine things that are said to draw conclusions, to make an argument that has absolutely no foundation or relevance to what you're speaking about. So the application that was made to this court was to pursue the court to say that votes meant valid votes, and by somehow or the other, make that equate back to what the CEO's advice could be. Well, it can't, because unless English language has changed drastically, he could really only give advice about the person who is deemed to be elected. Everything else, he can't give advice for that. The chairperson is not interested in his advice on how to drive on the road. These are things that we must put within the realm. But you see what keeps happening, and what is testing the patience of the nation is this. First, it started with 33 is not a majority of 65. And then this supposedly decent and integrity government told the people that while we are going to go discover this and educate ourselves about what every 5-year-old knows, you have to allow us to go to court. And the common thing that was going around, well, yes, you have to allow us to go to court because we have a right to approach the courts. Are they surprised by the conclusion they got? Is anybody surprised by the conclusion? Then following that was Ulita Moore, where Gecom clearly had the power to order a recount, and Gecom ordered that a recount be done. Then it was that we were arguing, APNU was arguing that a recount should not be done. Plain as day, it's written in the law. You try to twist the language with tricks and chicanery, it will never work. But that's what you did, and that's what APNU was doing. And there again, it was while we are doing this, we sit in office and we have a right to ventilate our issues. So again, we come with the third one now. But this is beggars belief. You've come to the third one that it means valid votes. And I guarantee you that the reason that in some sectors of the society that are sympathetic to APNU, they are celebrating because they don't see that valid votes was what was counted all along. They think it's something, I can't imagine what it was, but they think it's something entirely different. And they believe it equates to what the CEO, Mr. Lowenfield, can do, and it relates to what his report will say, and it relates to some fanciful report that he will give to disenfranchise more than half of the people who voted in this election. And I don't understand why they think that this is a logical or this is an appropriate thing for you to do. But while that goes on, we're all made to say, well, look, you got to look at it this way. But beggars believe. It was valid votes that were counted in the first place, and it is valid votes that were attended to. And we do know where the votes are, and we do know what the parties are, and the whole country knows how many votes each party got, and the whole country knows what is the allocation of seats in Parliament, except for the 3 people who are sitting in Kingston and the 7 further ones who are sitting in further up the road at Gecom. Apparently, the whole world knows this, and the people whose sole job it is to actually know this, because they are paid by the state to know it, don't.
Yeah. But I mean, this is...
Charles, before we go, and I want to ask you something, Charles. I'm reversing roles, forgive me.
Mm-hmm.
Sanjeev has gone a bit more political than I would like to, and I understand why. He's representing the PPP and they've won an election, so all is well. But it seems to me that you need someone, you need an antagonist. You need someone on the other side who is going to justify and rationalize the approach taken by the APNU faction. And you don't have one. Can I ask why is that? I expected to come here and have a debate.
We did try to get an APNU attorney, but we were not successful. But definitely, no, we did try.
We have tried many times to get APNU spoke.
Who? Please tell me who, because
even in Guyana, we tried to get someone at Congress Place. We tried to get.
Ideally, that's the perfect situation you want. You want a Sanjeev with the APNU attorney to kind of battle it out. But unfortunately,
we're not getting it, Tim. I know, and that's a valid question. We're not getting that. But come back to the point. And again, even the guys here in New York is trying to get someone in Guyana to be on the program with us, and they're not successful. So
you see, I myself have never been invited. I don't know if Sanjeev has, but I myself have never been invited onto an NCN program or a Chronicle program or a program with our chap now, Duncan. You know, you would think that they would ask for the other side, but I myself have never been invited, and I'm wondering why.
I haven't.
We have reached out. We have reached out. But gentlemen, based on what we are saying so far, and I want to say this in not to put you 2 guys up, but I believe Guyana will be better off if both of you become judges of the High Court, because the thing is, your explanation that you have so far given to us is very clear and concise, and I think it is really based on the rule of law, whatever the law says. The 2 of you have both agreed to that. And I'm sure if we had a PNC attorney, they would also say that the law applies, but I guess it comes back to the interpretation of the law. My question to you guys is this. Gecom, today's ruling, the High Court, the Court of Appeal says that they're putting it back to Gecom, the commission, to determine that validity of the vote. So does it mean now that the 7-member commission, I'm standing a meeting tomorrow, if they're going to discuss that, and can this ruling from the Court of Appeal disbar Gecom from making the declaration of the result when they meet tomorrow?
The point
simple answer
is, Charles, is that Gecom have already decided the validity. Gecom's record reflects that these people turned up, showed their ID, and voted. That is one screening process done. Gecom's record on the recount and on the original statements of poll show that these are the numbers that voted, and this is how they voted. That's the second screening process finished. Gecom has done its work. The only thing left now for Lowenfield to do is, based on the recount numbers, on the valid votes as already established by Gecom's record and the ballots in the box through the 2 screening processes that we described, is to say how many seats are allocated and to declare Mr. Ali as president.
There is, to answer your question, there is nothing that occurred in court today that will prevent Gecom, when they meet tomorrow, from proceeding with what they are doing. There is nothing. And again, we get back to the same thing, that what is happening is we have an entire political following, a party that is being misled by its leaders. Its leaders are feeding them all of these things about what they're not, what basically lies. I mean, for want of a better phrase, a better word, it's lies. They are not telling them the truth. Now, Gecom has already, at the recount, if you look at all 10 regions, the statement of recount says the number of valid votes. That has already been determined. The APNU stand on that is they did not sign all of the statements of recount. Well, if you don't want to sign it, we don't have to compel you to sign it. This is Gecom's job. Gecom is saying to you, you can stand by and see that we're doing it fairly and transparently. If you don't want to, don't. Now, but the point still remains that what is the result of that? It is irrelevant whether an APNU person signs that tabulated recount, because, of course, Gecom has done it, and Gecom accept that that is the figure. So Lowenfield, who is similarly an employee of Gecom, can't disregard those figures, and he can't disregard what the staff has done.
Yeah,
okay, gentlemen, when we come back, Salim,
we have a related question from a viewer. He asked what was meant by the stay that was granted. Does this mean that Gecom has a few days to do something until they can act or make a declaration? What does a stay mean? And I think a lot of Guyanese have been at the edge up until today, and now they hear this new word called stay. Can you guys explain to the viewers what does that mean and what's the implication as it relates to a declaration from Gecom?
Well, can we ask the attorney to bear that in mind? When we come back, they will answer that question. So let's take a break and we'll be back. Thank you.
This is Richard David, a man championing the cause of the people, a leader who wants to take his district to the next level, fighting for affordable housing, fair property taxes, fighting for tenants, fighting for protection and healthcare for all, especially immigrant communities and undocumented workers.
I'm the opposite of Trump. I really am. I'm the candidate that came here without my papers. I am the American dream. My family came here and worked our butts off to rise up, and we're contributing to our society. We're taking care of our neighbors, and that's what immigrants have done forever in this country. That is the story of America.
Even before COVID-19, Richard has been there for his people. He is a man who has worked in government for 10 years and knows how government works. He is the man who will make a difference. He is a man who will fight for you.
We need to rise up. This is our time. If we don't make our voices heard now, we're going to continue to be ignored. Rise up, come out, vote. Please make this our moment. Vote for Richard David, District 31, and the elections on June 23rd.
You can count on Richard. Rise with Richard. Let's rise up together.
Globespan 24x7 is offering professional streaming services. Be at ease and let Globespan 24x7 handle all of your streaming services for talk shows, religious programs, funerals, and birthdays. Get professional streaming done with ease. Globespan 24x7 professional streaming services will give you the peace of mind that you deserve. Call 631-782-9272. That's 631-782-9272. Or email sales@globespan247.com.
Welcome back to our program here at Globespan 24/7. Again, we want to thank Nohar Singh for making this platform available, and to Devin, our technical specialist, for bringing it live throughout the world. Gentlemen, Salim asked a great question before we went to break. What does this stay really means?
Well, usually a stay of execution, that is, when a stay of execution is made, is usually when a coercive order is made, directing that you do something within a certain amount of time. And the stay would mean that you don't actually have to do it right away from the date of the judgment. So, for example, if the court has ordered you to move your vehicle from where it is located, and they give you a stay of execution for 3 days, then it would mean that you don't have to do it right now, because ordinarily an order of court speaks from the time it is made. So if you get a stay for 3 days, well, then you don't have to do it for 3 days. In the circumstances of a determination which was made here, which is the interpretation of a constitution, I'm not sure that the stay of execution is of any value. It is very much akin to having declared a valid vote. It doesn't really advance the cause any further down the road.
Tim?
People say stay, and they say it as an abbreviation. It's stay of execution of the court's process. So if I get a judgment against you for $100 and you don't pay me, I can go to a marshal, and a marshal is a court's policeman. And I can say to the marshal, go and sell Sugrim's property and give me my $100. Or if I get an injunction against you not to come on my land and you come on my land, I can go to the marshal, the court's policeman, and say, put Sugrim in jail for breaching the court order so that it can be enforced. So when the court says I'm staying execution, what they're saying is my marshal, my policeman, is not going to be enforcing this order for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. It's not that you don't owe the money. It's that you will not be subject to the marshal coming to take your property or to put you in jail. So when you have a declaration, the court declares that this is the meaning, votes means valid votes. The marshal isn't coming to do anything. So to talk about a stay.
So it's a moot point.
It's a moot point, yes.
So this means that Gecom can go ahead with their meeting tomorrow and make a declaration.
Not necessarily. Justice Claudette Singh has always been very careful with the courts, and rightly so. She is a past judge. She has respect for the judicial process. And you will remember the first matter that was filed before the Chief Justice, George. Claudette Singh immediately said that she was not going to proceed until the court gave her directions. This particular one, immediately she stopped everything until it was determined. She has that history, and I don't see her changing that course of action. It is one that is commendable, and that's what she does.
But the CCJ, the stay that the opposition asked for, Mr. Khan, is it to prepare the opposition party for that filing to the CCJ? Maybe you guys can help us there.
No, I mean, I know that there is consideration being given to an appeal to the CCJ, but I don't believe that an appeal to the CCJ is absolutely on the cards, because right now, as we stand, it doesn't really advance the nature what it is. It says very clearly, Gecom has already got the information. Gecom has already made the determination of valid votes. We know what the count is for the the parties. We know what the seat allocations are. That Gecom has already received that information from the CEO. Gecom needs to take that forward, and move forward and make a declaration based on it.
Yeah.
Now that there is nothing pending in any court, then Gecom is free to act.
Yeah. I know there's a talk and there's a buzz and there's probably some expectation by the general public that CCJ might be the next step. And if it is CCJ by whichever party or group of parties, what is it that we're going to be seeking clarification for, or definition for, or what is it? Because again, I think Guyanese are being taken for a ride through the courts again, and they're not too sure what kind of smoke screen is being sprayed on them. But again, from your point of view as active in the legal field, what is it that we might be seeking clarification for from CCJ?
It would be a reversal of the order that was made by the Court of Appeal. At least speaking for the team of lawyers that I am a part of, and from what I heard of the other lawyers, there was really an argument that under Article 177(4), which was the article of the Constitution by which this was being done, the court, in fact, had no jurisdiction to hear this complaint because it was premature. There was the first thing that the legislative scheme, which should have been put in place for the enforcement of the rights under 177, had not been done, and therefore there was no power in the court to do it. And secondly, that there was a precondition to this article being engaged, and that was there had to be a president elected. So unless what the applicant in this case was doing was questioning the election of Mr. Granger in 2015, there has been no president elected in this election as yet, because there is no declaration of the winner. So the application would be premature and should not have been made. So as a matter of law, what would happen is the application that would be made to the Court of Appeal, to the Caribbean Court of Justice, would be on the basis that the court wrongly took jurisdiction upon itself in a matter where it did not have jurisdiction and made an order. And if that were to succeed, that the court wrongly took jurisdiction, then it would mean that the jurisdiction is reversed. The jurisdiction did not exist, which means the court would not have had the power to make the decision. So the decision would be reversed. So that would be the workings of an appeal, but the issue would still arise and the matter would still be whether an appeal in these circumstances are necessary, when what they did was, inserting the word is a bad precedent. Generally speaking, it's a terrible precedent that we will have on the books where judges will insert words into statutes. On this occasion, the word that was inserted was valid. We might one day have the word not, which would change the meaning of a statute. So we can't really allow judicial activism to the point where they insert words into a statute. That's not where the meaning of the statute is clear. You can do it if the statute is so convoluted. The only way you can do it, the only way you can make sense of it, is to add a word so that it makes sense. But this statute is very clear. There was no need for this.
And leading on from that, Sanjeev, Timothy, Sanjay, if I get you right, you're not saying that the Court of Appeal do not have jurisdiction, only it was a premature filing. They would have jurisdiction after the president would have been declared and sworn in. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. So having said that, Tim, if this goes to the Court of Appeal, what time frame are we talking about for them to undo what was done?
The CCJ.
Yeah, the CCJ.
I'm in two minds about the CCJ application. I've heard the argument that the Court of Appeal didn't have jurisdiction. And I think that there are arguments for and against. the thing is that it's a technical argument, and let's do away with the legalese and the the noise. At the end of the day, when you appeal a decision, you don't appeal the reasons for the decision. You don't appeal all the circumlocutions by the judge arriving at his decision. The judge could have talked total garbage, but if at the end of the day he reached the right conclusion, whether by accident or not, what you appeal is the conclusion. The conclusion of this court was to throw out everything in the application and to say most votes means most valid votes. And if I was a judge sitting in the CCJ and you came to me complaining about that, I would say, wait, so you want me to rule that most votes means most invalid votes? What's your complaint? What are you quarreling about? And that's why I see this as a storm in a teapot. Because most votes, of course, means most valid votes. It doesn't mean most Czechoslovakian votes. It means most votes validly cast and counted in Guyana. And if that's what you want to appeal on the jurisdictional ground, yes, technically you may have good grounds of appeal. Why take the effort? Why go to all those lengths? And that is the reservation I have. Yes, there is an issue as to jurisdiction, but what harm was done? Why are you coming to bother me in the CCJ about most valid votes?
Sanjeev?
Oh, well, as I told you, that's really the position. The position is it is being considered as to whether an appeal would go forward, and it is being considered as to whether the jurisdiction of the court, which we believe was the court wrongly took jurisdiction and inserted a word into the Constitution which it should not have done. But in the grand scheme of things, what has happened is the reports are already in with Gecom, and the determination of the valid votes has already been done by Gecom. Is there really a reason to go ahead with an appeal in these circumstances? But that is being considered.
In answer to that, Charles, let me say this. I've just seen a publication, a press release coming from the Prime Minister's office saying, Court of Appeal today ruled final results of the election should be determined only by valid votes cast. This paves the way for the Chief Elections Officer to exclude thousands of fraudulent ballots for dead and migrant Guyanese that were cast in the elections by massive voter personification. The ruling will allow submission of a report of the valid votes to the Election Commission before the winner is declared. On the basis of valid votes, the incumbent coalition government will be re-elected for a second term. Now that is total garbage.
And that was exactly my point. This was never about where my ex was.
It is rabble-rousing. Yes. It has no bearing on the decision of the Court of Appeal. But that very innocuous, almost invisible, almost useless ruling by the Court of Appeal is giving grist for the propaganda mill to churn out this kind of rubbish so as to rabble-rouse, so as to rile up supporters who really desperately want to believe something. And that is the danger. So for something like this, I can see a need to appeal just to get it thrown out, because this is intolerable.
Yeah. And coming back to a related question, and you guys are both respected attorneys in Guyana. You're part of the legal system, the legal infrastructure in Guyana. And I think for the average Guyanese, they're weary and they're tired and almost ready to give up. They're fed up with politics and the legal system, having a very vague line between them. We see for the last almost, it's going to be 2 years soon, that we've gone from politicians to judges to attorneys, and it's a vicious cycle. And do you guys believe that? And while the court system is set up to mediate these issues, whether political or not, do you feel that it has gone to a level where it undermines the judicial system, where politicians, whether incumbent or opposition or whatever, is just using the court to kind of build their argument and shore up their side of the argument. Are we abusing the courts and the legal system? I mean, that's probably the quick question I want to ask. Are we abusing the legal and the court system that we have in Guyana?
Salim, everybody has a right to go to court, and you hear the parties saying that ad nauseum. Oh, we have a right to go to court. Let the court decide it. We're a democracy, and we're a nation of laws, and that kind of thing. And it sounds very good, and it's true. But here is where the corruption comes in, you see. The principle that you have a right to go to court is the most fundamental principle. It is so important to guarantee your rights and to ensure your protection from the institution. But as soon as you start using that academic principle to abuse it by going to court for something that you know is rubbish, so as to achieve an ulterior motive of delay or of obfuscation or of sidetracking or introducing red herrings, as soon as you do that, as soon as you abuse the court's process, you are abusing one of the most fundamental and sacred rights we have, and you are undermining our democracy. So when you go to court to argue that half of 65 is 34, you know you're talking nonsense. And what you're trying to do is buy time. And you buy time at first instance, and you buy time in Court of Appeal, and you buy time in the CCJ, so that it takes months. When you go to court to protect your appointment of James Patterson, knowing you should never have appointed James Patterson, you are abusing the court's process. So it's all well and good to say, oh, we all have a right to go to court and we're a nation of laws. But as soon as you do it to undermine the very institution that you are pretending to uphold, you're corrupting our whole process, and you're a traitor to our democracy. And that's what we have seen time and again.
And Sanjeev, on the same question, when should the court draw the line on these misuse and abuse?
Well, I don't think I agree with Tim. You see, what makes it difficult is this. You don't want to stop people's access to the courts. You want to allow them to go to court. But we need a judicial system that might be a little more firm. We need to not have proceedings be used in this way to simply delay a process. Maybe we'd have rules in the future that says if in these circumstances you go to court, you have to leave office while it's being determined. Something akin to that. I'm just saying, obviously, that wouldn't really work in the real world. But there need to be something. There need to be some disincentive for you to choose to abuse the process in this way. But it's been more than 100 days since we've had an election, and we have endured as a nation every ridiculous proposition that has been put to us by the coalition in government. I mean, this could have all gone away if Gecom had at the very beginning of this said to Mr. Lowenfield, listen, you got to show everybody your statement of polls and let's all go home. It would have been done at that stage. But we kicked the brick further down the road. We went through this whole thing that we would do a recount. We really only needed to do a recount of Region 4, but we did a recount of all 10 regions. While we did that recount, we had to endure these really preposterous claims of migration and dead voters. They have made so many of these complaints but there's no proof, there's no evidence, there's nothing in relation to any of them. So it's a problem. The CARICOM report was telling when the language in the report is we are of the unshakable belief that the count of the votes represents the will of the Guyanese electorate at the polls, and it is sufficient for a declaration to be made of the winner. They said they witnessed that they were the APNU agents made all of these complaints, which were preposterous. In one case, no one voted None of the people registered in at one polling station, no one voted, and the APNU rep was still insisting he had to make these objections about migrants and dead people voting, and no one voted at that one. And
And they
and
have,
and they itemized in detail that the process was there, that the chairwoman was under enormous pressure by all sides, but principally in those in the coalition. We endured every day them going to the media and speaking in the media tent outside to say there are all these people, but they could give no evidence. And day by day, what they were raising were being debunked one at a time, one at a time. By the end of those 34 days, everybody knew. But it's like Tim said, this case, as a pure matter of law, there may be, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, there may be no real reason for you to appeal against it. But as I said at the beginning, what this is being marketed and the narrative that is being created by APNU, the APNU coalition to their supporters, is that this somehow changes the recount numbers and they are now the winner. So you could see from the Prime Minister's office what exactly it is that they're hoping to do. And Tim is entirely right. That is utter trash. There is no basis for Lowenfield to do anything like that. How did he do it? What evidence did he take into consideration? Did he hear the people who he wanted to disenfranchise? Did he give them an opportunity to be heard? Did he take any evidence it was that what it was, the votes that he were remaining? How did he come to this preposterous position that if there was one complaint in the box, all of the votes in that box were not to be counted? How stupid is this? But again, that's what's being sold to the APNU and their supporters. And it's entirely unfair that the leaders are being so dishonorable. It is terrible that they're lying to their faithful supporters, of which they are less and less daily, because people are realizing that they are being lied to. And this is being done. This is only being done to prolong the time in power. And I've said it before. I've said this to Timothy before. The plan seems to be, how do we stay in power for one more day?
And this begs the question, if I can ask both of you, why is it so difficult, or there's an unwillingness by elements in Gecom to make a declaration? And the part B of that question is, why is it so difficult for APNU to accept or concede if the PPP did truly win this election due to valid votes? What's fundamentally driving the decision not to concede?
The second one is easy. Greed and power. I mean, that's all it comes down to. The absolute need to remain in power and the absolute need to, the greed to enjoy the sweet of being in power and the abuse of the powers that has been taking place. But to answer your first question,
it's got to be more than that, because your average supporter of the APNU are also not willing to concede.
Because those that are benefiting.
APNU leaders are going to say, no, I'm not going anywhere. Because
no, but they benefit the leaders.
Thousands of other APNU people who are saying, I can't leave. Some of them are crying. Some of them are saying.
But it comes down to your leadership. Your leadership are telling you that the leaders who will benefit directly from remaining in power and have ministerial portfolios or had ministerial portfolios, they are leading their supporters to believe that they are being robbed and that somehow or the other their vote is being stolen. And by doing that, you incite them to fight for what it is that they believe. But that clearly, they had their SOPs the same way we did. They knew who won this election 2 days after the election.
Yeah.
They knew that. But your first question as to what's to stop Gecom doing this is because there was a systematic process that took place. What happened when Dr. Steve Surge-Bally left as being chairman of Gecom, and there was that hiatus? There were persons who were nominated to be the chairman of Gecom, and eventually Granger unilaterally appointed his own person. And during that time, an enormous amount of staff changes took place at Gecom. And essentially what was done is the decks were loaded. Now, it's not to say that everybody there is like that. But if you went to Gecom during any time to do with the count that took place at Ashman's building, or any time for the recount that took place at Arthur, you will realize that there are persons there who have and they're unsuitable for being there, and they inspire no confidence. Miss Roxanne Myers is one of those persons. There was no trust, and it is felt that she was doing things that should not have been done. And she's part of this. She's the deputy CEO. There wasn't confidence in her. There's no confidence in Lowenfield. Mingo was a returning officer. There was no confidence in him. There are other persons for which there are the same difficulty of no confidence. Because if you were actually there at Ashman's to see when the count was going on, and persons were saying that they were falling sick and they needed a rest, and if you
Actually,
saw
I spent a whole week at that building.
Yes, and if you saw what was going on, and you realized just how childish it was,
The bomb scare.
it was about, and it literally was more childish than the dog ate my homework.
Absolutely.
It literally was. We were there for all night, and they couldn't find enough staff. $8 million of taxpayers' money, and they were saying that they didn't have someone to carry on with the count. It was preposterous. 8 billion.
Yeah.
8 billion. Mingo went to the hospital and came back in the afternoon. Then we had it was a series of things, all designed to stop counting Region 4 by using the statement of polls, which was going on smoothly.
Yeah. And Timothy, I'm sure you're listening. You campaigned heavily on winner not take all sort of politics. Do you sense that not want to give up power, as in the case of APNU, that some of that dynamics is playing out?
Well, I smiled while Sanjeev was talking, because he put it all on one side. But in the winner-take-all system, when you're out, you're out. You have zero. And I seem to remember 5 years ago, there was a rallying cry, cheated, not defeated. The fact is, nobody has conceded an election in Guyana since 1992, when Hoyt reluctantly conceded to Jagan. At every other time, you will hear the supporters rallying, saying we've been cheated. We were cheated out of office. So it's no different this time. And it's part and parcel of the extreme emotions and extreme despair and extreme triumphalism you see, because your party's in or your party's out. And in the winner-take-all system, it's all or nothing. That's what needs to change. And what I smile about, actually, is that although ANA was created on the platform of constitutional reform for a system of governance that represents everybody, that is actually becoming something that you see a lot of PPP supporters running away from now, for two reasons. First of all, they won the election, so they're in with 100%. But also their total disgust at how Granger's administration have tried to rig this election and are pursuing the course of action they're pursuing. And while I disagree with them strongly on the first, I am finding it increasingly difficult, and this is tragic for me, because I still believe that you must get rid of the winner-take-all system. But I'm finding it increasingly difficult to say to PPP supporters, look, 4 to 5% of the population feels the same despair you felt 5 years ago, and there needs to be an accommodation. And they're saying they are linking, you see, the dishonesty of the leadership with their supporters, which is tragic and unfortunate. And they're saying These people are demonstrating how corrupt and rotten they are. How can we expect to share power with them? But the message that I want to give is that if you attach the corruption of the leadership to their supporters, well, that cuts two ways, and that means the whole of Guyana really needs to sink under the sea. We have to accept that we are all Guyanese, we are all equally Guyanese, and there must be some kind of system that fairly represents me in government as well as Sanjeev.
Gentlemen, when we come back, let's talk about the way forward, both of you being attorney and leaders in Guyana. Let us talk, and Sanjeev did raise some point that we want to zoom in on. So when we come back, let's talk about that. Thank you.
Hello, this is Albert Baldio, your public advocate and former Democratic district leader. In these trying times, we need fresh leadership, tolerance, respect, and inclusion for all of us. God has heard our community's prayers that we overcome evil and get back to fighting for you. He's given us a bigger platform to fight for democracy, also for our beloved Guyana. Please vote for me to become your next assemblyman. Absentee ballots have been mailed back to all who applied, but you can still apply for one now at nycabsentee.com. nycabsentee.com. The deadline ends soon. Tick off temporary illness and vote for Albert Baldio when the ballot comes back. You do not have to leave your home to vote in this election. This is about all of us, not me. Together we will fight, and together we will win. Please vote for me, Albert Baldio. Give me a chance to fight for you. God bless, and let's stand together.
January marks 1 year since Globespan 24x7 embarked on this initiative to offer a platform that brings in all sides, all points of view, and all concerns. Viewers in Guyana and across the world are participating in discussions that are bringing to light issues relating to social, economic, and political matters that have been plaguing our nation. Globespan's platform offers Guyanese to express their concerns and discuss solutions in the political realm, thereby addressing the polarized situation. Discussions also include social ills, such as alcoholism, domestic violence, and suicides that have been plaguing the people. The platform also mitigates the brain drain by having speakers that live in Guyana and across the world participate in these discussions. This concept will avail a broader view for the benefit of all Guyanese, so Globespan needs your support to offset the expenses. Kindly contribute by clicking the link in the description to help support these programs.
Okay. Welcome back to our audience. We have a really great live discussion this afternoon with Mr. Sanjeev Datadin and Mr. Timothy Jonas, two prominent attorneys in Guyana, Mr. Datadin being a member of the People's Progressive Party, and Mr. Jonas being a member of the chairman of New United Guyana. Gentlemen, before you went to break, and Salim been asking really nice questions to you guys, Sanjeev, you mentioned a very great point, that if a petition is raised in an election, for instance, that the incumbent should step down and allow an interim government to take over until the finalization of those petitions. The thing is this in Guyana, we are claiming we have independence. But just to remind you, Mr. Mingo, when he presented his fraudulent declaration, he was taken out of Gecom by the police armed security. He was protected by the police rather than being arrested. So the thing is this, we have independence, but where does it stop? Think of it this way. If you, President Mr. Jagdeo is the leader of the PPP list. He will decide who will go to Parliament. So to go into Parliament and he select a list of 33 persons, assume they get 33 seats, he decide who the 33 will be. Now they're subject to him. If they don't follow his guidelines, they're expelled. The police commissioner is appointed by the president and the deputies appointed by the president. Who will they be? They can be fired by the president. So if they go against the president, they will be removed. The thing is, we have sort of independence, but it's not independent. My question to you is this: how do we move forward with a constitution that will bring some form of control to a situation like we have now when this nonsense that went on. I mean, listen to the Prime Minister. I think he's smoking something. That's so ludicrous statement that this dealing of the court today, the ruling of the court, seems to have given the APNU a win. That sounds so far from the truth. Where do we go from here, gentlemen?
Well, the first thing is that this process, as much as it has caused Guyana and Guyanese so much pain, is not a bad process, essentially, of what was going on. I know there can be improvements, but let's talk about this process. This process was essentially hijacked by Mr. Mingo, who decided to do what he wanted. He had his fantasy numbers, and the commission, Gecom, ought to have stopped him. They ought to have stopped him from doing what he was doing. And they ought to have made him do the right thing and obey the law. And he didn't even obey the law after the court had made an order. Now, that sort of thing is really a different thing from you having proper rules. You can have all the rules in the world you want, but if nobody's going to obey them, then what's the point? Now, we could look at where we got here today, but we didn't get here overnight. We got here since the no confidence motion, and then we had the ridiculous 34. And then in an effort to appease the person who should have been out of power and out of government, we have bent over backwards to show him that he should be out. Now, that's the most preposterous thing that I've seen. He has lost the no confidence motion, but you have to justify to him before you kick him out. How is that possible? And why was he able to remain? He was able to remain, obviously, because in the historical and the actual setup of what Guyana is, the police or the military were not going to take any steps to remove him. That was the long and short of it. And it is not the same thing to say that if the PPP had won the election, that they can hire and fire the commissioner of police and get them to do what they want. That's not been the experience in Guyana. In the last time, in 2015, there was a no confidence motion tabled. Parliament was prorogued. Following the prorogation, when Parliament was prorogued, an election had to be held. Because what might be the difference is that the one party is able to put people onto the streets in a very aggressive way to protest, and no other party is able to do that. That's a big issue of what's going on. But these are things we've got to address. There are ways. I mean, Timothy and I go toe-to-toe on the various ways of how we can improve governance and how you can have things. My solution has always been, and my thing has always been, you don't need to actually share executive power to have every accountability. I think what you need to do is you need to have transparency in the decision-making process. But the government of the day, or the side that has won the most votes, they must be able to have their way, or they must have enough votes in whatever commissions or whatever you set up to have their own way. But there must be no ability for that to be secretly done. So, for example, if you had a board for the petroleum sector, and we created a board, and everything that had to be done had to be brought to the board, and the board should be representative of all political parties and all persons. And it meant that if that was so, and it was all open, then this is what would have to happen. Now, it would mean that there would be no arrangements that would be made in secret and out of the knowledge of all the persons involved. And I think that what is required is there needs to be more transparency in the execution of the public tasks, and the public budget. And that's my view is that could be established quite easily with legislation to make things more open. And if you're to make things more open, then that's your best bet at transparency.
Tim, any comment there?
Transparency is one step in the right direction, but at the end of the day, unless you have a statutory structure that binds everybody, the corrupt minister, the corrupt official will continue to be corrupt and get around it. We see that in our parliament. A 33-32 majority makes the winner a dictator. And you can cry bloody murder in parliament. At the end of the day, the legislation will be passed. And if you have a 33 majority, the laws that you pass will not be laws geared for transparency. We see that in the petroleum legislation. We see that in all the other legislation, central housing, all the other areas where GA, where commissions are created and where money passes. The power rests with the executive, and that is what creates the scope for corruption. So to talk about, oh, we'll put a couple of the other parties, a couple other people in the commission so they see what's going on, it sounds good, but it doesn't work, because you have not diluted the fact that you are an elected dictator. And the only way to do that is by a true system where statutorily you have to share.
Salim?
And on the same line of thought, with Gecom and its recent, not recent, it's been almost a year now, when they have avoided calling the election or being prepared for an election, then trying to put together a list, and that operation was aborted. And so there was a tremendous amount of apprehension about what Gecom has been doing and for who. Do you guys believe that the Gecom has set a precedent in terms of the erosion of credibility for institutions, state institutions? The courts right now is on the block, with what's going on now, what has been going on. But there are tons of institutions in Guyana where Guyanese might be looking at them with a funny eye that say, hey, you probably like Gecom too, and probably all these many of these commissions also. So is there a general erosion of credibility and integrity by these institutions that are supposed to be independent, that are supposed to represent you and I, that are supposed to avoid us going to the court to define valid and non-valid? What are your thoughts on that? I mean, for me, as an average Guyanese who want to see a difference, I feel that our institutions are the ones that have been overtaken, and vine has, political vines have grown all over them, and they've lost independence, integrity, credibility, and so on. What are your take on that?
You see, if you take a look at our public institutions, I've said to persons before that unless you have worked a little bit and lived a little bit or had some experience with what a petro economy is, an economy where the foundation is petroleum in a big way, you can't, people will tell you every day about it, but unless you see it and unless you live in it a little bit, you would not realize just what sort of forces move people. And I have been since 2004 doing oil and gas law around various places, and I thought to myself, and I've told people, that the fight for this election would be like you would never have seen in Guyana before, because the Treasury doesn't have $5 anymore; it has $500 billion or something along those lines. So you were going to see a great difference. One of the things that we were not prepared for, and we did nothing in the last 5 years since the discovery of oil to improve, is our public institutions were just not ready for it. We did nothing. We didn't pass legislation. We didn't change procedures. We didn't do anything to prepare for it. So maybe that's not directly the fault of an election. That's a bigger issue. But what happened here with the election was this. Regrettably, it is happening where everyone knows the result. Everyone in Guyana understands what the result is. But the government is bent not to give up, and they are finding excuses. And unfortunately, what's happening is there are various
You say the government
childish.
Gecom. Isn't it
No,
Gecom's responsibility
no,
to declare a winner?
yeah, but you see, what has been happening is the government with their representatives on Gecom and the government with their policies of what they require to be satisfied. Hans Gaskin said something that a lot of people might not have picked up on. He said basically what they want is they want you to show them on their terms, to their standards, and at their level that they have lost. It doesn't matter that they have lost in the eyes of everybody. They expect to be convinced to their standard in the way they want to be convinced that they're lost. And that will never happen. But we keep going down this route of doing that. Now, I actually, for a minute, I was just quickly reading what came out of the Prime Minister's office, what Timothy mentioned a little bit ago. You know what's the strangest thing that struck me about that press release? How do they know what Lowenfield's report is going to say? If Lowenfield, as of today, is in a position to give a different report, which is not true, by the way, that's not the position. But the Prime Minister's office is saying that they're able to do something, and it will show that they have won the election, the coalition. How do they know what it would be in terms of valid or valid votes? Because that's not been done. The ruling was today. The assessment of valid, which Lowenfield has no authority to do, by the way. How do they know what he will do? And the same thing, if you were to look at this morning's newspapers, this morning, Chronicle newspapers, today's newspapers, look at the headline. That newspaper was printed yesterday. Look at the headline about what they said the ruling in the Court of Appeal would be. And you tell me, whoever is their editor, please, he is underutilized at Chronicle. He is a fortune teller. He is underutilized.
We got to wrap up shortly. We have a really great discussion. Timothy, in wrapping up, what happens tomorrow at the Elections Commission? What happened this week? Are we getting a new president this week?
I think Gecom is a really good example of how a 4-3 majority, just like a 33-32 majority, is really a dictatorship. So when Mr. Granger was talking about absolute confidence in Gecom and it's an independent constitutional body, he was happily singing that song after he had unilaterally appointed Patterson, so that there was a 4-3 majority. And against the 3 PPP commissioners, who of course will vote en bloc, Patterson appointed who he wanted to appoint, hired who he wanted to hire. It was under his aegis that they started this thing about doing a new house-to-house registration, even though there's nothing in the legislation that justifies it. So he was singing to the hymn book that Mr. Granger handed him. And that is exactly the problem. So when Claudette Singh got into the situation, she was met with a stacked deck. She was met with an institution that had already been created to accommodate any APNU excesses that may be necessary. And that included Mingo, that includes Lowenfield, that includes a whole structure designed to give Mr. Granger the luxury of saying, Gecom is an independent body and we will abide by their decision. You notice they're a bit more shrill now, because it's dawned on them that Justice Claudette Singh might not be the pawn that they thought she was. She has shown some level of independence, and suddenly you have one set of litigation against Gecom, a lot of noise about the validity of votes and this, that, and the other. They're no longer singing from that same hymn book saying, we have absolute confidence in Gecom and the chairman will do the right thing and they're an independent body. Oh no, you don't hear that anymore. As soon as you have a truly independent organization, everybody's worried. And that's what we really need. We need our organizations to be independent, and the way to do that is not to allow either side to have the saying power, to have the dictatorial power in that organization. Whether it's a commission, whether it's a board, whatever it is, whether it's the executive.
And having said that, thing, well said. Some of our viewers online is saying that the constitutional mandate need to get on board from day one with a new government. We need to change our constitution to reflect exactly what you guys are discussing tonight. Sanjeev, anything in your closing statement?
What I would like to see done is we move past this. Guyana is on its knees, and this can't continue. 100 days beyond an election, if I told all three of you gentlemen on the 1st of March that 100 days after the 2nd March elections, we would not have a result, you would give me any odds I wanted on that bet. And this is where we are. And it appears almost as if there is no end in sight. But I hope that better sense prevail. This ruling today about valid votes changes nothing about the reports. Gecom has already decided who the valid votes are. There is a meeting of the commission tomorrow, and I sincerely hope at that meeting of the commission that the recount data, which demonstrated that the 33, 31, 1, and that is what the parliament is, and I hope that Dr. Ali will be sworn in as the president.
Before I ask Salif to come on, Sanjeev, Bibi Ali had asked a question which I wanted to ask you, but I didn't until now. If Mr. Lowingfield do not submit his report as is required, can the chair now declare Mr. Ali the new president?
Well, there are a couple steps in between. The Gecom as a board, they have the power to direct any employee or any person within the body to do what must be done. So if he refuses to do it, then they have the power to direct. But the reality, the truth is that as it relates to this particular election and this instance, that cannot arise because he submitted it already.
Well said.
So it has already been submitted.
Thank you, guys. Salim, any closing statement?
No, I'd just like to thank our guests and thank you, Sugrim, for partnering with me this evening. I think it was a great conversation. And again, I think one of the problem of Guyana that I've unearthed is not enough of us know what our rights are. The Constitution itself is so vague and so general, and I think apart from just making it technically correct and distributing the power correctly in the reformation process, we need to make the Constitution simple. We need to put it in English, not in British English and some Shakespearean English. We need to put it in English, common English, But I think we're in exciting times in Guyana, and whoever wins, every Guyanese need to work towards building up the country. COVID, the election, our bad policies by APNU over the last 5 years have resulted in a very, very damaged, crumbling economy that's going to take its toll over the next year or so. We see that the Treasury has no money. We see that, Gaisuko has no money to pay its staff. So I don't know what's going to happen, but the biggest casualty of this administration or this prolonged saga will be our economy, which will be a tough hole to get out of. So I think it is incumbent that we push our leaders on both sides to get to a resolution, get a government in place, and start rebuilding the country. I think if you look at the figures, COVID is a problem around the world, and certainly in Guyana. but I think the damage is coming from our political leadership, and not from the pandemic itself. So with that, I want to say good night to everyone, and it's been a pleasure.
Good night.
Sharing this platform, and I look forward to more of these educational.
Good night. Good night to you, gentlemen. Good night to Tim. Good night.
I want to thank you guys also for being with us tonight. And before you go off, Sanjeev, I know the Sahara dust gonna pass through Guyana soon. I think tomorrow or so.
Yes.
So you'll have beautiful sunrise, excellent sunset. And I pray God that Guyana will really rise to the occasion. And hopefully we'll have a new president this week. We'll be saying that all the time. That tomorrow as the commission meets, that they will make a firm determination and we get this thing over with. So gentlemen, Sanjeev, thank you so much for being here. Timothy,
good night.
Thank you
and
as
may
always.
God be with you.
Salim, we want to thank Nohar Singh and Devin for the wonderful job they've done for us. And to all our audience, we want to thank you so much for being part of us. Until the next time, we'll see you again. And God bless you. And God bless our dear country of Guyana. Thank you.
Good night.